Over the years, Hollywood has been the setting not only for grand productions and glamour-filled events, but also for unsolved crimes, supposed curses linked to films, and tragedies that remain unexplained to this day. Hidden within the mecca of cinema are stories as dark as they are fascinating, and in this video, we will explore some of them. So, get comfortable and turn off the lights, because these are 7 unsolved mysteries of Hollywood. So, we'll see you over there. How's it going? Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Let's begin. The death of Bob Crane. If you are quite young, the name Bob Crane probably doesn't ring a bell, although you have most likely seen his face more than once. Crane was a well-known television actor in the 60s, remembered primarily for the sitcom Hogan's Heroes, where he played the charismatic Colonel Hogan. However, his name went down in history not only for his career, but for the strange circumstances of his death. In the early morning of the 29th of June 1978, Bob Crane, who was 49 years old at the time, was found lifeless in his temporary apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona. The scene was simply chilling. Crane lay in his bed, covered in blood. He had an electrical cord around his neck, but the cause of his death was not asphyxiation, but rather blunt force trauma. The actor had received a brutal blow with an unknown object. Investigators suspected it might have been a camera tripod, although the murder weapon was never found. That day, the actor's promising career was cut short. The police investigation began, and suspicions soon fell on John Henry Carpenter, a close friend of Bob's. Carpenter worked in the home video industry, a novel technology at the time. It was discovered that the two had a peculiar friendship. According to various sources, they often frequented nightclubs where they would attract women using Crane's fame, only to take them to a private location where Carpenter would secretly film their sexual encounters. Apparently, on the night of June 28, Crane had called Carpenter on the phone to end their friendship, and the next day, Bob was found dead, something highly suspicious. The investigation led to the discovery of a blood stain of the same type as Crane's in Carpenter's car. However, this was not considered conclusive evidence, so he could never be formally charged, and the case eventually went cold. Years later, in 1990, the file was reopened with the hope that new DNA forensic techniques would shed light on the crime. A small tissue sample was discovered that could have belonged to the killer, but unfortunately, the tests were once again inconclusive. Carpenter was then taken to trial in 1994. However, the jury found him not guilty due to lack of evidence. John Henry passed away in 1998, possibly taking the truth of what happened to the grave, although he always maintained his innocence. To this day, what really happened that night remains a mystery, and Bob Crane's file remains open in the unsolved crimes category. The curse of the movie Poltergeist. From a mysterious crime, we move to the paranormal realm. In 1982, Poltergeist was released, a film that quickly became a horror classic, but over time, both the film and its sequels would be remembered not only for their hair-raising scenes but also for the disturbing succession of tragedies that affected its cast, misfortunes that fueled the legend of a supposed curse. It is said that the first victim was Dominique Dunne, the actress who played Dana, the older sister in the first film. In 1982, a few months after the premiere, 22-year-old Dominique was murdered by her ex-boyfriend, who strangled her during an argument. Her death, so close to the film's success, shocked the public. Following Dominique was Julian Beck, the actor who played the sinister Reverend Cain in Poltergeist II. He passed away in 1985, shortly after finishing his work on the film, although Beck was already ill during the shoot, which contributed to giving his character a quite particular look. He is usually included in the list of victims of the curse due to the proximity of his death to the film's release. The next was Will Sampson, who played the shaman Taylor in Poltergeist II. Sampson died in 1987 at age 53 due to complications from a heart and lung transplant. His death occurred a few months after the release of the second film. In 1988, the curse reached Heather O'Rourke, the child star of the saga, who died tragically just 4 months before the premiere of the third film when she was 12 years old. This was due to complications from a condition that was initially misdiagnosed. Her passing, being so young and in strange medical circumstances, further fueled rumors about this supposed curse. The final victim was Lou Perryman, who, although he had a minor role in the first film, is often cited as part of the curse due to the brutality of his death. Perryman was murdered at age 67 in his own home. the victim of a violent assault committed by an ex-convict with mental health issues. Many believe this curse has its origin during the filming of the first movie, more specifically during the famous swimming pool skeleton scene. Years later, it became known that, ironically, it was cheaper for the production to use real skeletons for this scene. Many consider this macabre decision a lack of respect for the dead and speculate that the action could have contaminated the production with negative energy. Some believe these are simple coincidences, and others maintain that there was definitely something very strange around these films, like JoBeth Williams, who played the mother of the family and said that every day after returning from the set, she found the pictures in her house crooked on the wall. In the end, it is up to each individual to decide whether to believe it or not. What is certain is that the Poltergeist saga left behind a list of tragedies and macabre deaths that have immortalized it as one of the great horror sagas, but also as one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries. The Black Dahlia. No video about Hollywood mysteries would be complete without this case. If you are a fan of true crime and mysteries, it is almost certain you already know it, but if this is your first time hearing about it, prepare to learn the details of one of the most aberrant crimes in Hollywood history. At approximately 10:00 a.m. on Wednesday, the 15th of January 1947, a young housewife named Betty Bersinger was walking toward a shoe repair shop with her 3-year-old daughter. This was near the intersection of Norton Avenue and 39th Street in the Leimert Park neighborhood of South Los Angeles, California, when she suddenly saw what she initially believed to be a broken mannequin lying in the bushes of a vacant lot. Upon getting closer, she realized with horror that it was no mannequin, but the mutilated body of a young woman. She immediately ran with her daughter to the nearest house and alerted the authorities. The scene was so macabre that even the most experienced police officers were completely shocked. I am now going to describe in detail the conditions in which the body was found. If you are listening to this on YouTube, I warn you that there will likely be a lot of censorship, as the video could otherwise be removed. But on audio platforms like Spotify, you will be able to hear all of this without any censorship. It goes without saying that if there are children or sensitive people listening nearby, it is best to skip this part. The body was cut cleanly in 2 halves at the waist by a technique called hemicorporectomy, an extremely rare operation that separates the torso from the legs through the lumbar region. The precision of the cut suggested that the perpetrator had very advanced surgical or anatomical knowledge. It was placed with the arms stretched above the head in a Y shape with the palms facing upward. The lower part was about 30 centimeters away, slightly turned to the right. The face presented one of the most terrifying characteristics of the case. It had deep cuts from the corners of the lips toward the cheeks, known as the Glasgow smile. It is known that these cuts were performed with surgical precision, very likely while the victim was still alive. She also had multiple superficial cuts on her arms, the inner thighs, and her forehead. There were also signs that pieces of skin had been removed from her right thigh and chest. The legs were spread in a way that many investigators interpreted as a form of deliberate humiliation. Both breasts had been excised. The body was completely drained of blood, which gave it a spectral appearance white as plaster or wax. And that was the reason why, initially, it had been mistaken for a mannequin. Doctors concluded that the death did not occur at that location, but that the body was transported already bloodless and arranged with great care. In addition to the mutilations, the body showed head trauma and evidence of having been bound, which suggested prolonged torture before death. Forensic experts later determined that the victim had died from a cerebral hemorrhage caused by a blunt blow to the skull, although the torture and the draining of blood contributed to that fatal outcome. Beyond everything we are saying, it goes without saying that the scene was not only violent, but also cold, methodical, and even theatrical, as if the killer did not just want to kill, but to send a message, provoke a reaction, or, as some suggested, leave a kind of signature. The victim was later identified as Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old, born in Massachusetts who had arrived in Los Angeles in the 40s with the dream of becoming an actress. Her life had not been easy. Her father abandoned her mother and her when she was very young. Since then, Elizabeth lived between Boston, Florida, and California, moving frequently and looking for every opportunity she could within the film industry. She was known for having an elegant style. She always wore black, used red lipstick, and had dark hair, always very well groomed. Unfortunately, although she moved in bohemian circles and knew people in the scene, she never managed to break into the world of film. In the final days leading up to her death, She was in San Diego and was last seen at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles on the 9th of January 1947, saying she was waiting for a friend. 6 days later, her body appeared in the vacant lot. Elizabeth was, like many other young women of the time, someone who came to Hollywood chasing a dream but ended up wrapped in one of its darkest mysteries. The tabloid press of the era quickly saw an irresistible sensation in the case, and it was the newspapers that nicknamed Elizabeth the Black Dahlia, supposedly inspired by the film noir The Blue Dahlia, which had been released just a year earlier. This nickname, in addition to alluding to the film, made reference to Elizabeth's dark hair and her typical black attire. The murder of the Black Dahlia then became a media circus. The victim was portrayed by some tabloids as a mysterious femme fatale full of secrets, although in reality, Elizabeth was more of a humble girl who had arrived at the place with hope and little money. On the other hand, the police investigation was one of the largest of its time. Up to 25 initial suspects were considered, and the case attracted not only onlookers and opportunists, but dozens of people who came forward to confess that the crime had been committed by them. But unfortunately, most were just looking for notoriety, further complicating the work of the detectives, and despite several clues and theories, the evidence could never point to a definitive culprit. Over the years, endless conspiracy theories have emerged about who the killer might be. One of the most striking suggested the director Orson Welles himself as a suspect, alleging that he could have known Elizabeth and arranged a meeting shortly before her death. This theory is actually considered far-fetched, and there is no real proof to support it, but it is a perfect example of the degree of speculation surrounding this case. Another theory has linked this case to the so-called Cleveland torso murderer, a serial killer from the 30s, hinting that it could be the same perpetrator given the similarity in the mutilations. In more serious investigations, one of the names that is frequently mentioned is that of Dr. George Hodel, a Los Angeles doctor who was subsequently implicated in other crimes. Decades later, one of Hodel's sons, who became a detective, claimed in a book that his father could have killed Elizabeth Short, presenting certain evidence that turned out to be more circumstantial. However, no formal accusation prospered, and he died without being charged. Other suspects included organized crime, some acquaintance of Elizabeth's, and even people directly linked to the police. But as we said before, nothing could be proven, and after more than 70 years, the Black Dahlia case remains unsolved, and the chances of a solution at this point are practically nil, as most of those involved have already passed away, and the forensic evidence of the time was insufficient or degraded over time. It is in this way that the image of Elizabeth Short, a young, beautiful, and tragically murdered woman, has become a symbol of Hollywood's darkest secrets. The Black Dahlia remains one of the most famous enigmas of American criminology that still generates theories in books, podcasts, and documentaries today. Hello. If you are enjoying this content, we have one small, very exciting announcement to make. This coming Saturday, November 29, we will be back at the Guadalajara International Book Fair. We will be doing a book signing at 5 p.m. at stand C22 of El Perseguidor. We will see you there. We are very excited to see you once again, so don't miss it. See you this coming November 29. The disappearance of Tammy Lynn Leppert. Tammy Lynn Leppert was born in 1965 and participated in beauty pageants from childhood, winning dozens of crowns. At 18, Tammy was a beauty queen in Florida and had achieved small appearances in film. In fact, if you have seen the famous 1983 movie Scarface, you might remember her. Tammy appears briefly as the blonde girl in a blue bikini during the pool scene and the chainsaw scene. She also had minor roles in other films like Spring Break, 1983. Her ambition was to make the jump to Hollywood, but unfortunately, that dream never materialized. At the beginning of 1983, Tammy started showing strange behavior after attending a party. She returned home terrified and paranoid. According to her family, something happened at that party that made her fear for her life. Tammy told her mother she believed someone wanted to kill her, though she did not specify who or why. Her fear was such that in the following days, she refused to eat food prepared by others and avoided drinking from open containers as if she feared being poisoned. Alarmed, her mother took her to a mental health center to have her under observation. After 72 hours of evaluation, doctors found no drugs in her body and no clear signs of psychosis. Still, her family noticed she was not the same as before. On the 6th of July 1983, Tammy left her home in Rockledge, Florida, supposedly to go to Cocoa Beach with a friend. This 20-year-old young man became the last person to see her alive. According to his statement to the police, during the car ride, they had an argument, and Tammy exited the vehicle in a bank parking lot in Cocoa Beach around 11:00 a.m. After that, no one ever saw her again. Tammy was only 18 years old and carried no money or shoes at the time of her disappearance. Her mother reported the disappearance immediately, but intensive searches yielded no results. Tammy Leppert simply vanished. The case, as expected, attracted a lot of media attention in Florida. Several theories emerged to explain what could have happened to her. One hypothesis points to Christopher Wilder, an Australian serial killer who was active in Florida during 1984, kidnapping and killing young women. Wilder had a chilling modus operandi. He would attract girls by offering them photo shoots for a supposed modeling job, and then assault and kill them. Given that Tammy was a model, she would fit the profile of Wilder's victims. However, Wilder died in 1984 during a shootout with police, and authorities were never able to link him directly to the girl's disappearance. Another suspect was John Crutchley, the highway vampire, a man convicted of kidnapping and rape in Florida, linked to several deaths. He operated in the same area and era. However, no evidence was ever found to connect him with Tammy. Crutchley committed suicide in prison in 2002. Tammy's mother, who knew her daughter very well, proposed another theory. She believed that perhaps she could have been murdered because she knew something about the drug trade in the area. According to her, Tammy had mentioned that she had seen something that scared her. It is even said that Tammy tried to report certain information to the police before disappearing. Perhaps she thought someone from the criminal underworld was pursuing her because of what she knew. Finally, there is the possibility that, in the midst of her paranoia, she simply decided to flee and start a new life, or that she suffered some type of mental episode that led to her disappearing voluntarily. Over the years, authorities have kept the case open. Images with age progression have been published to imagine what she would look like if she were still alive today. In 1992, the famous program Unsolved Mysteries dedicated a full episode to this case, but even that did not lead to new leads. Currently, Tammy Leppert remains officially missing, and her fate remains an enigma. The Curse of the Omen. Returning to cinematic curses, it is the turn of The Omen, best known as La Profecía, the prophecy, at least in Spanish-speaking countries. In 1976, this horror film was released about a boy who turns out to be the Antichrist. The film was a success and earned a place among the classics of the genre, both for its diabolical atmosphere and its shocking scenes, but it is also famous for a series of real accidents and tragedies that occurred during its production. Many believe that dark forces attempted to sabotage this film, mainly due to its theme. Unlike the Poltergeist curse, in the case of The Omen, most incidents occurred while the film was actually being shot. In September 1975, the protagonist Gregory Peck was traveling to London when his plane was struck by lightning. Fortunately, it resulted in no fatal consequences. A few days later, executive producer Mace Neufeld suffered the same terrifying experience. A lightning bolt struck his plane on the way to England, something he described as the 5 most terrifying minutes of his life. And yes, a plane being hit by lightning is uncommon, but it can happen. However, incredibly, another lightning bolt also reached the plane of screenwriter David Seltzer on one of his flights. And as if that were not enough, a crew member was almost struck by lightning in Rome shortly thereafter. None of these incidents actually left anyone injured, but the statistic of 4 electrical discharges associated with people involved in the same film was enough to make more than one person's hair stand on end. As a result of this, producer Harvey Bernhard began wearing a cross around his neck during filming, convinced that the devil was working against this project. It seemed that planes in this film did not get along, but all of this was taken to a disturbing extreme when the production hired a private jet to transport Gregory Peck to Israel to film some scenes. However, at the last moment, this plan changed, and Peck did not take the plane. This was a stroke of luck, as the following day, that aircraft hit a flock of birds shortly after takeoff, and the pilot lost control, crashing the aircraft. All occupants of the flight died, in addition to 3 other people who were on the ground when the plane fell onto a vehicle. This tragedy shocked the team, and was another hair-raising event that added to the list. On the other hand, the behavior of the animals during filming was also quite unusual. Rottweilers were used to represent the dogs of hell that protect the cursed child. These dogs, which were perfectly trained and usually docile, showed uncharacteristically aggressive behavior during filming, and on several occasions attacked their own trainers without any provocation. Even an experienced stuntman, Terry Walsh, was violently attacked by one of the dogs during a scene, resulting in injuries despite wearing protections. In the famous zoo scene, when a pack of baboons attacks the car where the mother and little Damien are traveling, the situation became truly dangerous. As to get the reaction from the monkeys, they placed an alpha baboon inside the car, which infuriated the pack. So, these animals began to hit the vehicle with such ferocity that Lee Remick, the actress, went into true panic, and her terror on screen was not feigned. When the take finished, Remick confessed that she had gone through one of the worst scares of her life, as for moments she thought the baboons might break the glass and seriously hurt them. While all this was happening around the filming, Gregory Peck was also experiencing tragedies in his personal life. In June 1975, shortly before joining the production, Peck's eldest son took his own life with a gunshot. The emotional devastation for the actor was enormous, and yet he decided to continue with his commitment to the film. Furthermore, during his stay in London, Peck was nearly involved in another deadly incident. He had a dinner reservation at a restaurant, but he canceled the appointment at the last moment. And that same night, the IRA, an Irish terrorist group, bombed the restaurant, causing several deaths. Peck was saved only by luck for not having attended, but perhaps the most macabre episode of all occurred after the premiere of the film. On Friday, the 13th of August 1976, special effects specialist John Richardson, who had worked on the film, was traveling by road in the Netherlands together with his assistant and his partner, Lies Moore, when they suddenly suffered a terrible car accident. They collided head-on, and Liz was decapitated by the collision. Richardson survived, but witnessed the horrific death of his girlfriend. What is most hair-raising is that in the film, Richardson had been responsible for the famous decapitation scene by a piece of glass. Reality had imitated fiction in a gruesome way. In fact, a very popular myth says that Richardson, dazed after the crash, saw a road sign nearby indicating the distance to a town called Omen. The sign supposedly said that there were 66.6 kilometers left to reach it, as a macabre reference to the title of the film and the famous number of the beast. With so many unfortunate events, it is not surprising that people considered this film cursed. Producer Harvey Bernhard stated in interviews that he came to believe that something supernatural was trying to stop the film, given the succession of misfortunes. For his part, screenwriter David Seltzer was always more skeptical, attributing everything to simple coincidences and joking that if the devil had really intervened, the film would never have been finished. Perhaps, as in the case of Poltergeist, we are dealing with a chain of unfortunate events that the human mind relates in an attempt to find meaning in them. However, it is undeniable that the quantity and nature of the incidents is, at the very least, striking. Each spectator can decide whether to believe that there were strange forces at play or if everything was the result of bad luck. In the meantime, the curse of the Omen will remain one of the great mysteries of Hollywood, the death of Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood was one of the brightest stars in Hollywood in the 1950s and 1960s, protagonist of classics such as Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, and Splendor in the Grass. But today her name evokes not only those films, but also one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of cinema, the never fully clarified circumstances of her death. Natalie passed away on the 29th of November 1981, drowned in the waters of Santa Catalina Island in California, and the doubts surrounding what happened to her that night still persist. Wood was 43 years old and was spending the Thanksgiving weekend aboard her yacht, the Splendor. On the trip, she was accompanied by her husband, actor Robert Wagner, and a friend of both, fellow actor Christopher Walken, who was Natalie's co-star in the film Brainstorm, which they were filming at the time. So, according to the official version, on the night of November 28, Natalie Wood disappeared from the yacht after supposedly attempting to move a small dinghy, an inflatable boat that was tied to the vessel. Apparently, the boat was hitting against the hull, and she, who couldn't sleep due to the noise, wanted to adjust it or perhaps jump toward it to adjust it better. In that maneuver, Natalie would have slipped and fallen into the sea. Her body was found floating a short distance away on the morning of November 29. Initially, her death was officially classified as an accidental drowning. However, from the beginning, there were elements that did not quite fit with that explanation, and as time passed, more disturbing details came to light. For one, Natalie had a deep fear of water. Friends and family recounted that the actress practically had a phobia of swimming in the ocean. In fact, since she was a child, she was terrified of the idea of drowning. Her own sister, Lana Wood, confirmed that Natalie had an almost pathological fear of dark water and that she didn't know how to swim. The origin of that fear went back to her childhood. When she was very small, around 8 or 9 years old, her mother had taken her to visit a psychic. This woman took her hands, observed them in silence, and told her something the girl would never forget. Be very careful with water. You will die in dark water. Natalie's mother was perturbed by the comment but took it as a warning that should be taken seriously. And from then on, her mother instilled an almost superstitious fear of water, insisting that she stay away from lakes, rivers, and, of course, the ocean. This makes the idea that Natalie Wood would venture alone in the middle of the night to deal with a boat in the water questionable. Another important detail is that on the night of her disappearance, there were arguments and shouting aboard. The captain of the yacht, Dennis Davern, initially backed the accident version, but years later, he changed his story. In 2011, he stated that that night Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken had a strong verbal fight behind closed doors. Apparently, Wagner was jealous or annoyed because he suspected that Natalie and Walken felt attracted to each other. Although Walken always denied an affair, the captain maintains that after the fight, Natalie was no longer in sight and that Wagner prevented him from searching for her immediately, delaying the distress call to the Coast Guard for several hours. Additionally, there were other witnesses. A couple of people who were on a nearby boat claimed to have heard a woman's screams for help in the middle of the night, coming from the darkness. According to their testimony, they heard someone shouting, "Help! I'm drowning." And they also heard a male voice responding, "It's okay, honey. We're coming for you." After that, only silence. These statements suggest that Natalie was alive in the water for some time, calling for help. Wagner admitted to having heard noise that night but never acknowledged having heard her scream. The body of Natalie showed bruises and wounds that were suspicious. In the original autopsy, some hematomas were recorded on her arms and legs, but they were initially attributed to blows suffered while falling into the water. However, when the case was reopened decades later, a new forensic analysis in 2013 changed the category of death from accidental to undetermined cause, and noted that several of these bruises could have occurred before Natalie fell into the sea. It was also noted that the inflatable boat she supposedly tried to get into appeared adrift, separated from the yacht. It had the engine turned off and showed scratches on one side, as if someone had tried to hold onto it desperately. Dennis Davern, the captain of the yacht, published a book in which he pointed directly at Robert Wagner as being directly responsible due to negligence. However, at no point did he accuse him of homicide. After new interviews in 2018, the Los Angeles sheriff designated Wagner as a person of interest in the case, considering him the last person to see Natalie. He denied any involvement and avoided giving statements. To this day, there are no charges against anyone, and the case remains open. The death of Natalie Wood has become a legendary mystery. For some, it was simply an unfortunate accident, and for others, a covered-up murder that is still waiting to be solved. The cursed script. For this last mystery, I would like to rescue what was said by the screenwriter of The Omen. If the devil had really intervened, this film would never have been finished. Well, many believe that this could be the case of Atuk, a film so cursed that it never even managed to be filmed. Atuk is a satirical Canadian novel written by Mordecai Richler in 1963. The plot is a comedy that follows a proud Inuit indigenous man who travels to the big city, satirizing the cultural clash, greed, and hypocrisy of modern society. Curiously, there is nothing sinister or paranormal in the plot. In fact, Atuk was supposed to be a light comedy film and not a horror flick. In 1971, director Norman Jewison, famous for Jesus Christ Superstar, bought the rights to make the adaptation for the screen. The script was written in the 80s by Todd Carroll, setting the story in the United States instead of Canada. At first glance, Atuk seemed like a promising and fun project, but this is where the disturbing part begins, and that is that the film was never shot, not because of a lack of desire or budget, but because every actor chosen to star in it ended up dying before beginning to film. John Belushi was the first actor chosen for the role. Belushi was an explosively famous American comedian and actor from Saturday Night Live and movies like Animal House or The Blues Brothers. He was an ideal choice for the role because of his robust physique and his comedic style. He showed interest in the script, and it is said that he was going to star in the adaptation at the beginning of the 80s. But this never happened, as on the 5th of March 1982, at age 33, he died suddenly from an accidental overdose of heroin and cocaine, a cocktail known as speedball. His death was a hard blow for Hollywood. At that moment, no one thought of curses, as it was simply a tragedy attributed to his personal excesses. However, he was the first name linked to Atuk, who passed away, before being able to realize the project. Sam Kinison was the next one chosen. He was a comedian known for his aggressive humor and his shrill screams on stage. In the mid-80s, a few years after Belushi, the Atuk script came back to life with Kinison in mind. In fact, Sam managed to film some test scenes as Atuk, but the filming did not progress. Kinison wanted to rewrite parts of the script. He had friction with the producers, and the project was put on hold. Shortly after, on the 10th of April 1992, the 8-year-old actor died in a car accident. A 17-year-old drunk driver invaded his lane and collided head-on with him. Sam was not wearing a seatbelt, and his head slammed into the windshield. Witnesses to the accident reported that Kinison surprisingly seemed to be okay after the accident, as he got out of his vehicle and sat on the side of the road, where shortly after he died due to internal injuries. It is said that in his final moments, he seemed to be talking to someone invisible, saying phrases like, "Why now?" After a long silence, he said, "But why?" And then, as if listening to an answer, finally exhaling, said the following, "Okay, okay," before passing away. John Candy was the third candidate to be Atuk. Candy was another very beloved comedy actor, famous for films like Uncle Buck, and for his brief participation in Home Alone. Candy did not get to officially sign for the role, but it is known that the project was offered to him in 1993. Unfortunately, on the 4th of March 1994, while he was in Mexico filming the movie Wagons East, the actor suffered a massive heart attack and died at age 43. An urban legend says that he had the Atuk script in his drawer, as he had been reading it. Even with all these deaths, the idea of finally filming Atuk was still present in Hollywood, so Chris Farley was considered for the role. Farley was considered the heir to Belushi on Saturday Night Live for his style and charisma, and had gained a great opportunity in the 90s. And if this actor's name doesn't ring a bell, you will surely remember him for films like Beverly Hills Ninja. Unfortunately, Farley's life also followed in the footsteps of his idol, as on the 18th of December 1997, three-year-old Chris died due to an overdose of cocaine and morphine combined with advanced heart disease. His death was almost a mirror of Belushi's, as the cause was the same, in addition to the fact that both were the same age at the time of their death. With Farley gone, Atuk was once again left without a lead. In fact, as a curious detail, Chris Farley had also been chosen to play Shrek and, in fact, had already recorded some tests, but after his death, the project was delayed and restructured, resulting in the movie we all know, starred in by Mike Myers. By this point, after the death of 4 actors, the Atuk script already had the dark fame of being cursed, but as if all this weren't enough, one last victim was still missing. Phil Hartman, who was actually a close friend of Farley. Hartman was a brilliant comedic actor whom you might remember in wonderful roles like Troy McClure and the lawyer Lionel Hutz on The Simpsons, as well as his memorable role as Arnold Schwarzenegger's neighbor in the movie Jingle All the Way. Well, after Farley's death, Hartman considered rewriting the Atuk script to keep the project alive. However, this never happened, and it is that on the 28th of May 1998, his wife Bryn had a strong argument with him at the house where they lived in Encino, California. And during the night, under the influence of alcohol and cocaine, Bryn grabbed a .38 caliber revolver and shot Phil 3 times while he was asleep. After this murder, Bryn left the house and went to see a friend to confess what she had done. Her friend accompanied her back to her home and called the police immediately. The woman locked herself in a room while officers rescued the couple's 2 young children, who were asleep in another part of the house. Before the police could arrest her, Bryn committed suicide with a shot to the head. Only a few months had passed since Farley's death. Hartman's characters were retired from the Yellow series out of respect for his memory, and there is even talk that there were plans to make a live-action Troy McClure movie that never came to be. After the death of this actor, no studio to this day has attempted to take Atuk back to the cinema. In Hollywood, No one is willing to touch that script, so it is very likely that we will never get to see an adaptation of this innocent comedy. Today, the Atuk script remains in some filing cabinet in Hollywood, hidden, forgotten, and perhaps it is better that it stays there. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found these mysteries very interesting. Remember to leave your like and comment if you liked it so that we can reach more people. Without further ado, I say goodbye. See you later.